In this chapter, the second tithe, known as the festival tithe, is discussed. Basically, the whole nation of Israel went to Jerusalem and had a big cookout. The second tithe was set aside to be used at various feasts. This was a time of great rejoicing, and the tithe was eaten by all, and not just those who were from the tribe of Levi. In the New Testament, we don't go to Jerusalem to celebrate the feasts, but the early church had a tradition called the love feast. Jude chapter 1 verse 12. So instead of the second tithe being used as it was in the Old Testament, the early church would gather together in fellowship with a meal. What is not clear today is whether it was combined with the Lord's Supper, or was this something in addition to the Lord's Supper. Yet many churches today do have at times a meal or cookout for their members after church or various times and for various purposes. It doesn't celebrate the feast like the Old Testament, but to fellowship with other believers. Some examples are a church picnic, new members class, a welcoming, home groups, leadership gatherings, baptisms, etc. The feasts were designed as a time for celebration. So it is with our giving today. God desires that we give in celebration of what His Son has done. In all honesty, being involved in a home group with the meal is one of the best ways to get to know your fellow brothers and sisters in the Lord at a much deeper level. Even though I am moved to Texas, there are some that I was involved in a home group I am still in contact with today. There's a big difference between a home group and a feast as it was done in the Old Testament. However, in many ways, the concept of the feast continues today, where believers fellowship with one another by having a common meal. So the church does not eat the tithe. For most of us today are not farmers or herdsmen, but the spirit of celebration continues. Dr. Kelly speaks concerning the use of wine for the feast. This is not an excuse for abuse, but he gives a clarification of the use of wine. Quote, "However, this by no means authorizes drunkenness or the abuse of alcohol. These texts describe rejoicing at worship services, not personal drinking abuse." He goes on to say, the alcohol content was far below what is consumed in our time. Local drinking water was often polluted and unsafe to drink. End quote. In all honesty, Dr. Kelly nails this point very well. Wine was to be used and not abused. 1 Timothy chapter 5 verse 23, it says, "And don't worry too much about what the critics will say. Go ahead and drink a little wine, for instance. It is good for your digestion, good medicine for what ails you." Dr. Kelly points out that during the 40 years in the wilderness, the children of Israel did not tithe. Only in the Holy Land were they to tithe. If they were to leave that land, they would no longer tithe. He also mentions of a rest of the 7th year and the year of Jubilee for the land. Thus, there would be no tithe given during that time. My response is simple. The time in the wilderness, God fed them with manna. The New Testament focus is not on the land of promise, for no Christian is allotted a piece of Holy Land, but that we fulfill the call of God on our life. Yet Jesus did speak of preparing a place for us. We are citizens of heaven itself, with our future inheritance is for all believers. Someday we will see the new Jerusalem in which the righteous will have a place to dwell. So the tithe could not work in the same way today. The gospel is not restricted to the Holy Land, and thus our inheritance isn't either. The New Testament believer prays thy kingdom come in whatever land they live. Although the land of Israel is still the Holy Land, the New Covenant declares that we are the temple in which God dwells, and thus we bring God's presence not just to the Holy Land, but to all nations. Second, giving a rest to the land is based on farming. What I wonder about, if the farmers were to give a rest to the land, then what about the herdsmen? How did that work? I honestly don't know, but did this affect the herds at all? The New Covenant is based on all occupations. The Old Testament believers didn't have car payments, electric, water, sewer, trash, internet, insurance bills back then, and we don't get a break from any of those bills today. Not even for a month, never mind the 7th or 15th year.